Jake loved his evening walks with Bruno. Every single day at 6:30, rain or shine, they would head out together. Bruno was a big German shepherd with golden brown fur and the most loyal eyes you could imagine. Jake had rescued him from the shelter 3 years ago, and they had been best buddies ever since. The neighborhood they lived in was called Pine Valley Heights. It was one of those nice suburban areas where people actually knew their neighbors' names, and kids still rode bikes in the streets. Jake had moved here 2 years ago after his divorce. He needed a fresh start, and this place felt like home from day one. The houses were well kept, the lawns were green, and everyone seemed friendly enough. Jake worked as a security guard at a local office building downtown. It wasn't the most exciting job in the world, but it paid the bills and gave him decent benefits. Plus, being in security meant he had gotten his concealed carry permit pretty early on. He carried his pistol with him most places, though he had never had to use it for anything serious. Just having it made him feel more confident, especially after some of the situations he had seen at work. Bruno was the kind of dog that turned heads when they walked. He was big, probably around 80 pounds, but he was gentle as a lamb. Kids in the neighborhood would run up to pet him, and Bruno would just sit there wagging his tail like he was getting paid for it. Some people were nervous around German Shepherds because of their reputation, but anyone who spent 5 minutes with Bruno knew he was just a big softie. Their usual route took them through the main streets of Pine Valley Heights, past the small community park, around the little pond, and back home. It was about 1.5 miles total, which was perfect for both of them. Jake got his exercise, and Bruno got to sniff every tree, fire hydrant, and interesting smell along the way. Dogs have their priorities, and Bruno's priority was definitely investigating every single scent the neighborhood had to offer. The community had its own homeowners association, but they were pretty laid back compared to some of the horror stories Jake had heard from friends in other neighborhoods. There were basic rules about keeping your grass cut and not painting your house neon green, but nothing too crazy. Jake had never had any problems with them. He kept his property neat, paid his dues on time, and minded his own business. On this particular Tuesday evening, the weather was perfect. It was late spring, so the temperature was just right, not too hot, not too cold. The sun was starting to set, casting that golden light that photographers love so much. Jake had had a pretty normal day at work. Nothing exciting happened, which in the security business usually means it was a good day. Bruno seemed extra happy that evening. He had spent most of the day napping in his favorite spot by the back door, so he was full of energy and ready to explore. As they walked, Jake noticed how green everything was getting. Spring was definitely in full swing, and all the trees were leafed out. Some of the neighbors were working in their gardens, and everyone waved as they passed by. Mrs. Patterson from down the street was watering her flower bed. She always made a fuss over Bruno, and today was no different. She had some treats in her pocket and gave Bruno a couple while they chatted about the weather. Her husband was inside watching the news, she said, shaking her head about all the crazy stuff happening in the world these days. Tom from across the street was washing his car in the driveway. He and Jake had become pretty good friends over the past year. They sometimes watched football games together on Sundays, and Tom was always willing to lend a hand if Jake needed help with something around the house. Tom waved them over and spent a few minutes talking about his plans for the weekend. He was thinking about taking his family camping up in the mountains. The community park was busy with the usual evening crowd. There were a couple of families with young kids on the playground, some teenagers shooting basketball, and an older couple sitting on one of the benches feeding ducks at the small pond. Bruno loved this part of the walk because there were always interesting smells and sometimes other dogs to say hello to. Jake had his waste bags with him as always. It was just common courtesy, and besides, nobody wanted to step in dog mess on their morning jog. Bruno was pretty good about his business. He usually took care of everything in the first 10 minutes of their walk, which made the rest of the time pure enjoyment. As they walked along the path by the pond, Jake thought about how lucky he was to live in such a nice area. Sure, his house was smaller than the one he had shared with his ex-wife, and his bank account was definitely smaller too. But this felt more like home than anywhere he had lived before. The people were genuine, the crime rate was low, and Bruno had plenty of space to be a dog. They had been walking for about 20 minutes when they reached the far side of the park. This was usually where they turned around and started heading back toward home. Bruno had done his sniffing, Jake had gotten his steps in, and they were both ready for dinner. Jake was thinking about what to make for supper, Maybe that chicken recipe his sister had shared with him last week. The sun was getting lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of evening that made you grateful to be alive and healthy. Jake felt relaxed and content as they started the second half of their loop. Bruno trotted along beside him, tongue hanging out just a little bit, looking like the happiest dog in the world. Neither of them had any idea that their peaceful evening was about to take a very unexpected turn. In just a few minutes, everything would change, and Jake would find himself in a situation he never could have imagined. But for now, it was just a man and his dog enjoying a beautiful evening in their quiet neighborhood, completely unaware of what was coming their way. The streetlights were just starting to flicker on as they made their way around the corner near the community center. It was that perfect time of day when day was turning into night, and everything felt calm and peaceful. Jake was already looking forward to tomorrow's walk, never suspecting that by the end of tonight his view of his safe neighborhood would be completely different. Jake and Bruno had just rounded the corner near the community center when two men stepped out from behind a white van parked on the side of the road. At first glance, they looked official. Both wore dark blue uniforms with patches and badges, and they had the kind of serious expressions that people in authority tend to wear. The taller of the two men raised his hand in a stopping motion. He was probably in his 40s with a beer belly that strained against his uniform shirt. His partner was younger and thinner, with a clipboard in his hand and what looked like a citation book tucked under his arm. They both had radios clipped to their belts and wore baseball caps with some kind of official-looking logo. "Excuse me, sir," the tall man called out as he approached. "I'm Officer Thompson with HOA Enforcement. We need to have a word with you about some violations we've observed." Jake stopped walking and felt Bruno tense up slightly beside him. Dogs are good at reading situations, and Bruno could sense that something was off about these guys, even if Jake couldn't put his finger on what it was yet. "Violations?" Jake asked, genuinely confused. "What kind of violations?" The younger man with the clipboard stepped forward. "I'm Officer Williams. We've been monitoring this area, and we've documented several infractions during your walk tonight." Jake looked around, wondering if they had him confused with someone else. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some mistake. I live here in Pine Valley Heights. I walk my dog on this route every single day." Officer Thompson shook his head firmly. "No mistake, sir. According to our records, you're in violation of Section 12A of the Community Guidelines, which prohibits walking dogs larger than 50 pounds after 7 p.m. After 7 p.m.? Jake glanced at his watch. It was only 6:45, but it's not even 7 yet, and I've never heard of any rule like that. The rule was updated last month, Officer Williams said, making a note on his clipboard. All residents should have received notification via email and postal mail. Jake scratched his head. He definitely hadn't received any emails about new HOA rules, and he always checked his mail. "I never got any notification about this. Can you show me where this rule is written down?" Officer Thompson pointed at Bruno. "That's a German Shepherd, correct? Those are classified as large breed dogs. The new regulations are very clear about walk times for dogs over 50 pounds. Plus, we observed that you don't have the required waste disposal kit." "Waste disposal kit?" Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small roll of blue bags. "I always carry poop bags. I've got them right here." "Those aren't the approved bags," Officer Williams said, shaking his head. "The new regulations require biodegradable bags in the approved community color, which is green. Blue bags are no longer acceptable." This was getting more ridiculous by the minute. Jake had lived in several different places over the years, and he had never encountered HOA rules this detailed or this strict. Most homeowners associations cared about big things like house colors and fence heights, not what color your dog waste bags were. "Look," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm and reasonable. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I've been walking Bruno on this exact route for 2 years, and nobody has ever said anything about any of these rules." Officer Thompson pulled out what looked like a citation book. "Ignorance of the regulations isn't an excuse, sir. We're going to have to issue you a fine for multiple violations." "A fine?" Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "How much of a fine?" "Let's see." Officer Williams consulted his clipboard. "Oversized dog walking after hours, that's $75. Improper waste disposal equipment, that's $50. And failure to display current pet registration tags, that's another $75. Jake looked down at Bruno's collar. His dog tags were right there, plain as day. His tags are right there. You can see them. Those are veterinary tags, Officer Thompson said dismissively. The new regulations require special HOA registration tags for all pets. Those are available at the community office for a $25 processing fee. So let me get this straight, Jake said, feeling his temper start to rise. You're saying I owe you $200 for walking my dog in my own neighborhood, where I've been walking him every day for 2 years, because of rules that were supposedly changed last month that I never heard about? $225, Officer Williams corrected, still writing on his clipboard. There's also a $25 administrative fee for on-site citation processing. Jake looked around the neighborhood that he thought he knew so well. This felt like some kind of weird dream. In all his time living here, he had never seen these two guys before. He knew most of the people who worked for the HOA, and these weren't familiar faces. Can I see some identification? Jake asked. And can you tell me who your supervisor is? Officer Thompson's expression darkened. We don't need to show you identification, sir. We're authorized enforcement officers, and we're conducting official business. Everyone in authority has to show ID when asked, Jake said firmly. His security training had taught him that much. It's standard procedure. The two men exchanged a quick glance that Jake didn't like. Officer Williams cleared his throat. Sir, if you continue to be uncooperative, we'll have to add additional charges for obstruction of official duties. Obstruction? Jake felt Bruno press closer against his leg. I'm asking reasonable questions about rules I've never heard of and requesting to see your credentials. How is that obstruction? Officer Thompson stepped a little closer. The easiest thing for everyone would be if you just paid the fine now. We accept cash or check. That way this whole thing gets resolved quickly and you can continue your walk. Something about the way he said it made Jake's security instincts kick in. In his line of work, he had dealt with plenty of people trying to run scams or pull fast ones. This whole situation was starting to feel very familiar, and not in a good way. I want to speak to your supervisor, Jake said clearly. Right now. The two men looked at each other again, and Jake could see something pass between them. Whatever was going on here, he was becoming more and more certain that it wasn't what it appeared to be on the surface. Officer Williams flipped through several pages on his clipboard before looking back up at Jake. Our supervisor is currently handling another situation across town. We're fully authorized to handle all enforcement matters in the field. Then give me his phone number, Jake said. I'll call him myself. Officer Thompson stepped closer, and Jake noticed that his hand was resting on what looked like a radio on his belt. Sir, we don't give out supervisor contact information to residents during active enforcement situations. That's department policy. Jake was getting more frustrated by the minute. This whole thing felt wrong, but he couldn't quite put his finger on exactly what was bothering him. What department? Are you guys with the HOA office, or are you some kind of private security company? We're contracted enforcement officers, Officer Williams said, still scribbling notes on his clipboard. The HOA board hired our company to handle violations and compliance issues. What company? Jake asked. I want to see a business card or some kind of official documentation. The two men exchanged another one of those looks that Jake was starting to really dislike. Officer Thompson adjusted his cap and cleared his throat. Sir, I'm going to need to see your driver's license and proof of residence. Why do you need my ID? For the citation, obviously. We need to verify that you're actually a resident of this community before we can issue the fine. Jake thought about that for a moment. It seemed backwards to him. If he wasn't a resident, then why would they be trying to fine him for violating HOA rules? Wouldn't they just tell him to leave the property? I'm not showing you my ID until you show me yours, Jake said firmly. And I want to see some official documentation about these rules you're talking about. Officer Williams sighed dramatically. Sir, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. We're trying to resolve this quickly and professionally. The longer you delay, the more complicated this gets. Complicated how? Officer Thompson stepped even closer, and Jake could smell cigarettes and coffee on his breath. Well, for starters, we'll have to add charges for failure to cooperate with enforcement officers. That's another $50 fine. You've got to be kidding me. And if we have to call for backup, there's an additional service fee for that as well. Jake looked around the neighborhood again. Everything looked normal. A few houses had lights on, and he could see a couple of people in their yards, but nobody seemed to be paying attention to what was happening on the street corner. Bruno had been sitting patiently through this whole conversation, but Jake could tell his dog was getting restless. German Shepherds are smart, and Bruno could sense the tension in the air. His ears were up and alert, and he kept looking back and forth between Jake and the two men. "Look," Jake said, trying a different approach. "Why don't you just give me a written copy of these new rules and I'll make sure to follow them in the future? I'm not trying to cause problems for anyone." Officer Williams shook his head. "The violations have already occurred. The fines have to be paid regardless of future compliance." "But I didn't know about the rules." "Ignorance isn't an excuse," Officer Thompson repeated. "The community guidelines clearly state that all residents are responsible for staying informed about regulation updates." Jake was starting to feel like he was in some kind of bizarre alternate reality. "Fine. If you won't let me talk to your supervisor, then I want to talk to someone from the actual HOA board." "Give me Mrs. Chen's phone number." "Who?" "Mrs. Chen, she's on the HOA board. She lives over on Maple Street." The two men looked at each other again, and Jake caught what looked like confusion in their expressions. Officer Williams fumbled with his clipboard. "We don't have board member contact information with us in the field." That was the first thing they had said that Jake was absolutely certain was a lie. In his experience, HOA enforcement people always had direct contact with board members, especially for situations where residents were disputing fines. "What's the name of your company?" Jake asked. "Pine Valley Enforcement Services," Officer Thompson said without hesitation. "And who's your supervisor?" "Manager Rodriguez." Jake pulled out his phone. "I'm going to look up Pine Valley Enforcement Services right now and call your office." Officer Williams reached out and put his hand on Jake's phone. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to put that away. Using electronic devices during an enforcement interaction is prohibited." "Prohibited by who?" "Community Regulations, Section 15C. Jake pulled his phone back. "That's ridiculous. I'm not putting my phone away." Officer Thompson's voice got harder. "Sir, if you continue to interfere with this investigation, we're going to have to escalate this situation." "Investigation? I thought you were just writing me a ticket for walking my dog." "The situation has evolved," Officer Williams said ominously. "Your uncooperative behavior is causing us to reassess the severity of the violations." Jake looked down at Bruno, who was now standing at attention and staring directly at Officer Thompson. Dogs have incredible instincts about people, and Bruno clearly didn't like what he was sensing from these two guys. "I want to see your badges up close," Jake said. "Real close." Officer Thompson touched the badge on his shirt. "You can see it just fine from there." "No, I want to examine it." "If you're real law enforcement or real HOA officers, your badges should have official serial numbers and department information." "We're not required to submit our equipment for inspection by residents," Officer Williams said quickly. Jake was now about 90% sure that something fishy was going on. In his security job, he had dealt with plenty of people trying to impersonate officials, and these guys were hitting every red flag he had learned to watch for. "Here's what's going to happen," Officer Thompson said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "You're going to pay this fine right now, or we're going to have to take additional enforcement action." "What kind of additional enforcement action?" Officer Williams gestured toward Bruno. "Well, for starters, we'll need to impound the dog until you can provide proof of proper registration and vaccination records." Jake felt his blood pressure spike. "You're not touching my dog." "Sir, if you can't prove that the animal is in compliance with community regulations, we have the authority to remove it from the premises pending a full investigation." That was when Jake knew for absolutely certain that these guys were not legitimate. No HOA in the world had the authority to impound people's pets, and no real enforcement officer would even suggest such a thing. These were either criminals or the most incompetent fake cops he had ever encountered. The question now was what exactly they were trying to accomplish and how far they were willing to push things. Jake decided to test his suspicions. He pulled out his phone again and started recording the conversation. "I want to get this on video for my own protection," he said clearly. Both men immediately stepped back and put their hands up. "Turn that off right now," Officer Thompson barked. "Recording enforcement officers without permission is illegal." "Actually, it's not," Jake said calmly, keeping the camera rolling. "I'm on a public street and I have every right to record this interaction." Officer Williams looked panicked. "Sir, you need to stop recording immediately or we'll have to call for backup." Go ahead and call for backup, Jake said. I'd love to talk to some real cops. That comment seemed to hit a nerve. Officer Thompson stepped forward aggressively. We are real cops. We're official enforcement officers. Then you should be comfortable being recorded, Jake pointed out. Real cops get recorded all the time. It's part of the job. Through his phone screen, Jake was getting a much better look at their uniforms and equipment. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. The badges looked like cheap plastic replicas that you could buy online. The patches on their sleeves were crooked and poorly attached. Even their radios looked fake. They were missing the antenna extensions that real police radios always had. State your names and badge numbers for the camera, Jake said. We already told you our names, Officer Williams said, but he was backing away from the phone. Badge numbers, Jake repeated. Every real officer has a badge number. Officer Thompson fumbled around his chest, looking at his badge. Badge number 7749. Jake zoomed in on the badge with his camera. There was no number visible anywhere on it. I don't see any numbers on that badge. The numbers are on the back, Officer Williams said quickly. Show me. We're not required to remove our badges for inspection. Jake was now recording everything and feeling much more confident about the situation. These guys were obviously running some kind of scam, and they were getting more nervous by the minute. What's the name of your police department? Jake asked. We're not police, Officer Thompson said. We're HOA enforcement. But you just said you were real cops. We're certified enforcement officers. Certified by who? The two men looked at each other again, and Jake could see them trying to come up with an answer. Officer Williams cleared his throat. We're certified by the state licensing board. What state licensing board? What's the license number? We don't have to provide that information. Jake lowered his phone slightly. Actually, you do. Any private security or enforcement officer in this state is required to display their license number and provide it when asked. It's the law. Officer Thompson's face was getting red. Look, smart guy, we're trying to do this the easy way. You can pay the fine now, or this can get a lot more complicated. Complicated how? We can have your dog impounded and have you arrested for obstruction. Jake almost laughed. Arrested by who, you guys? You're not cops. Real cops have badge numbers, real radios, and real patrol cars. You've got a white van with no markings. For the first time, Officer Williams looked genuinely worried. Sir, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. No, I think I understand it perfectly, Jake said, still recording. You guys are running some kind of scam, trying to collect fake fines from people walking their dogs. That's not true. Then prove it. Call your supervisor right now. Call the HOA office. Call the real police. Do something that proves you're legitimate. Officer Thompson reached for his radio, but Jake noticed that he didn't actually turn it on or press any buttons. He just held it up to his mouth and pretended to talk into it. Control, this is Unit 7. We need backup at Pine Valley and Elm Street. There was no response from the radio because it wasn't a real radio. Jake kept recording the whole performance. Your radio's not working, Jake observed. Sometimes there are dead zones in this area, Officer Williams said lamely. Jake looked around. They were in the middle of a suburban neighborhood, not in some remote canyon. There was a cell phone tower visible just a few blocks away. Dead zones, huh? Bruno had been watching this whole interaction with growing interest. German Shepherds are working dogs, and they can sense when their humans are in potentially dangerous situations. Bruno moved closer to Jake's side and sat down. But Jake could feel the tension in his body. If these guys tried anything physical, Bruno would be ready. Let me ask you something, Jake said to Officer Thompson. What's the HOA president's name? I don't have that information with me. How about the property management company that handles this neighborhood? That's not relevant to this enforcement action. Jake smiled. It's Greenwood Property Management. They've been handling Pine Valley Heights for 6 years. If you guys were really working for the HOA, you'd know that. Both men were looking increasingly uncomfortable. Officer Williams was flipping through papers on his clipboard like he was looking for something that wasn't there. And another thing, Jake continued, warming up to his subject. The HOA doesn't even have enforcement officers. When there are violations, they send letters. If people don't comply, they file liens. They don't have guys in uniforms walking around writing tickets. The board recently changed their enforcement procedures, Officer Thompson said desperately. When? Last month. The board meets quarterly, Jake said. Their last meeting was in March. The next one isn't until June. I know because I get the meeting notices in my HOA dues statements. Officer Williams was now backing toward the white van. Maybe we should come back when you're more cooperative. Maybe you should leave and not come back at all, Jake suggested. Before I call the real police and report you for impersonating officers. We're not impersonating officers. Then what are you doing? Neither man had a good answer for that question. Jake could see them both glancing toward their van, clearly thinking about making a quick exit. Here's what I think is happening, Jake said, still recording everything. I think you guys are driving around neighborhoods looking for people walking dogs and trying to scam them out of money with fake fines. I think you've probably done this before, and I think you picked the wrong guy tonight. The silence stretched out for several long seconds. Jake could hear traffic in the distance and a dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood, but the three men stood there in a tense standoff, each waiting to see what the others would do next. That's when Officer Thompson made his biggest mistake of the evening. Officer Thompson's face had turned an angry shade of red, and Jake could see that he was losing patience with the whole situation. The fake cop was clearly not used to people questioning his authority or refusing to pay his bogus fines. You know what? Thompson said, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. I'm tired of playing games with you. He took a step toward Jake and Bruno, and Jake instinctively moved to put himself between the man and his dog. Bruno immediately picked up on the threatening body language and stood up, alert and ready. We're going to settle this right now, Thompson continued, reaching into his pocket. You're going to pay this fine, or we're taking the dog for official measurement and breed verification. Jake felt his heart rate spike. You're not taking my dog anywhere. It's standard procedure for oversized breed violations, Officer Williams chimed in, though he sounded much less confident than his partner. We need to verify the animal's exact weight and measurements. My dog weighs 78 pounds, Jake said firmly. He's been to the vet 3 times this year. I have all his paperwork at home. That's not official measurement, Thompson said dismissively. We need to use certified HOA scales and measuring equipment. Jake almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Certified HOA scales? Are you kidding me? This is serious business, sir. Oversized dogs can be dangerous to other residents and their pets. Jake looked down at Bruno, who was sitting calmly beside him, but watching every move the two men made. Bruno has never shown aggression toward anyone or anything in his entire life. He's the gentlest dog in this neighborhood. That's not for you to determine, Thompson said. We're trained professionals. Trained in what? Dog psychology? Veterinary medicine? What exactly are your qualifications? Instead of answering, Thompson suddenly lunged forward and grabbed for Bruno's leash. Come here, boy. We're going to take a little ride. That's when everything changed. Jake's security training kicked in immediately. Someone was trying to take his dog, and every instinct he had was screaming danger. He jerked the leash back and stepped between Thompson and Bruno. Don't you dare touch my dog. Thompson didn't back down. Instead, he grabbed for the leash again, this time more aggressively. Hand over the animal now, or you'll be charged with obstruction. Bruno reacted to the threatening movement by moving protectively in front of Jake. The dog wasn't showing aggression, but he was clearly ready to defend his human if necessary. Get away from us, Jake shouted, pulling Bruno closer to his side. Officer Williams was frantically flipping through his clipboard. Sir, you need to comply with official orders. You're not officials, Jake shot back. And you're not taking my dog. Thompson made another grab for the leash, and this time Jake had to physically push him away. The man was bigger than Jake had initially thought, and he was clearly not going to give up easily. That's assault on an enforcement officer, Thompson yelled. You're not an enforcement officer. The situation was escalating rapidly, and Jake realized these guys might be more dangerous than he had initially thought. They weren't just running a simple scam. They were willing to get physical to steal people's dogs. For all Jake knew, they were part of some dogfighting ring or puppy mill operation. That's when Jake made a decision that would change everything. He stepped back, keeping Bruno behind him, and lifted up his shirt just enough to reveal the pistol holstered on his hip. He didn't draw the weapon, didn't point it at anyone, didn't even touch it. He just made sure both men could see that he was armed. I'm a licensed concealed carry holder, Jake said clearly and calmly. And I'm telling you for the last time, stay away from my dog. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Both fake officers stopped moving and stared at Jake's waist. Thompson's hand, which had been reaching for Bruno's leash again, froze in midair. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Officer Williams said, backing up quickly. "There's no need for weapons here." "I haven't drawn any weapon," Jake pointed out. "I'm just making sure you understand that I'm prepared to protect myself and my dog if necessary." Thompson's aggressive demeanor shifted instantly to nervous confusion. "You can't threaten law enforcement officers." "You're not law enforcement officers," Jake said again, "and I haven't threatened anyone. I've simply made you aware that I'm legally armed and that I will defend myself if attacked." Both men were now standing several feet away, clearly unsure how to proceed. Their scam had obviously never involved dealing with armed victims before. "This is escalating unnecessarily," Officer Williams said, his voice shaking slightly. "You escalated it when you tried to grab my dog," Jake replied. "I'm just standing here on a public street with my legally owned pet and my legally carried firearm." Bruno had moved to sit directly beside Jake's left leg, positioning himself where he could watch both men while staying close to his human. The dog's ears were forward and alert, but he wasn't showing any signs of aggression. He was just ready to act if the situation required it. "Look," Thompson said, trying to regain some authority in his voice. "Maybe we can work something out here." "The only thing we're working out is you guys leaving," Jake said firmly. "Right now. But the violations, there are no violations. There are no fines. And there's no authority for you to impound anyone's dog." Officer Williams was nervously shuffling his papers. "Maybe we should come back another time when things are calmer." "Don't come back at all," Jake advised. "Find a different neighborhood for your scam." Thompson looked like he wanted to argue, but the sight of Jake's pistol had clearly changed his calculation of the risks involved. Whatever these guys were planning to do with Bruno, it wasn't worth getting shot over. "This isn't over," Thompson said, but his heart wasn't in the threat. "Yes, it is," Jake replied calmly. That's when they heard a car turning onto the street behind them. All three men turned to look, and Jake felt a surge of relief when he saw who was driving the approaching vehicle. The car pulling up to the curb was a silver Honda Civic that Jake recognized immediately. It belonged to Linda Chen, who served as the secretary of the Pine Valley Heights HOA board. She was a retired schoolteacher in her 60s who had lived in the neighborhood for over 15 years. Jake had met her several times at community events, and she was known for being sharp, no-nonsense, and absolutely devoted to keeping the neighborhood running smoothly. Linda parked her car and got out, immediately noticing the tense standoff happening on the sidewalk. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had the kind of presence that made people pay attention when she spoke. "What's going on here?" she called out as she approached the group. Officer Thompson quickly tried to take control of the situation. "Ma'am, we're conducting official HOA business. Please move along." Linda stopped walking and looked at him with the kind of expression that had probably terrified countless middle school students over the years. "Official HOA business? I am the HOA board secretary. What official business are you conducting?" Officer Williams fumbled with his clipboard. "We're issuing citations for community guideline violations." "Citations?" Linda's eyebrows went up. "The HOA doesn't issue citations. We send violation letters through the mail, and if there's no compliance, we file liens through our attorney. We certainly don't have enforcement officers." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Mrs. Chen, these guys showed up while I was walking Bruno and tried to fine me $225 for violating rules that don't exist." Linda looked at Jake with concern, then turned her attention back to the two men in fake uniforms. "May I see your identification and credentials, please?" "We don't have to show you anything," Thompson said, but his voice lacked the authority it had carried earlier. "Actually, you do," Linda said crisply. "I'm an officer of this homeowners association, and if you're conducting business in our community, I have every right to verify your authority to do so." Officer Williams tried a different approach. "Ma'am, we're with Pine Valley Enforcement Services. We were hired by the HOA board to handle compliance issues." Linda pulled out her phone. "Pine Valley Enforcement Services? That's interesting because I'm the board secretary, and we haven't hired any enforcement service. In fact, we discussed that exact topic at our last board meeting in March, and the vote was unanimously against hiring outside enforcement." Thompson was starting to sweat visibly. "Maybe the board made the decision after your last meeting." The board can't make decisions without meetings, Linda explained patiently, as if she were talking to a confused student. And I schedule all the meetings. The next one isn't until June 15th. Jake could see both fake officers exchanging increasingly desperate glances. Their story was falling apart completely, and they knew it. What did they try to fine you for? Linda asked Jake. Walking Bruno after 7 p.m. using the wrong color waste bags and not having special HOA registration tags for him. Linda actually laughed out loud. That's ridiculous. We don't have any rules about walk times or bag colors, and we certainly don't have special registration tags for pets. Where on earth did you come up with these supposed violations? Officer Williams held up his clipboard. They're all clearly outlined in the updated community guidelines. May I see that? Linda asked, reaching for the clipboard. Williams clutched it to his chest. This is official enforcement documentation. Civilians aren't allowed to examine it. Civilians? Linda's voice got dangerously quiet. Young man, I've been running HOA business in this neighborhood since before you were probably old enough to drive. I've read every single page of our community guidelines, and I helped write half of them. There is nothing on that clipboard that I don't have a right to see. Thompson tried to step in. Ma'am, we appreciate your concern, but we need to finish our business here and move on to other violations in the area. What other violations? Linda asked sharply. We've received multiple reports of dog-related infractions throughout the community. Reports from who? I handle all complaints that come to the HOA office, and I haven't received a single dog-related complaint in over 6 months. Jake was starting to enjoy watching these guys squirm under Linda's questioning. She was methodically destroying every part of their story, and they clearly hadn't expected to run into someone who actually knew how the HOA operated. Mrs. Chen, Jake said. They also claimed they had authority to impound Bruno for official measurement and breed verification. Linda's expression darkened. They what? The HOA has absolutely no authority to impound anyone's pet. That would be theft, pure and simple. We're certified animal control officers, Thompson said desperately. Then show me your animal control certification, Linda demanded. Show me your badges, your credentials, your supervisor's contact information, and your legal authority to operate in this jurisdiction. The two men stood there in silence, clearly unable to produce any of the documentation Linda was requesting. I'm calling the police, Linda announced, pulling out her phone. Wait, Officer Williams said quickly. Maybe there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding, Linda agreed. You two seem to have misunderstood that you could come into our neighborhood and run some kind of scam on our residents. We're not running a scam. Then explain to me exactly what you are doing, Linda said, holding her phone ready to dial. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're impersonating officials and trying to extort money from people walking their dogs. Thompson looked toward their white van, clearly calculating whether they could make it back to the vehicle before Linda finished calling the police. I wouldn't, Jake advised, reading the man's body language. I'm still recording everything, and running would just make things worse for you. You're recording? Linda asked. The whole thing. I started recording when they refused to show me their identification. Good thinking, Linda said approvingly. Then she turned back to the two fake officers. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to explain exactly who you are and what you're really doing here, or I'm calling 911 right now. Officer Williams looked like he was about to cry. Ma'am, we were just trying to make some extra money. By scamming our residents? It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. We just figured people would pay the fines rather than argue about them. Thompson shot his partner a look that could have killed. Shut up, Dave. Dave? Linda asked. I thought you said your name was Officer Williams. Dave, apparently his real name, looked completely defeated. It is Williams. Dave Williams. And what's your friend's real name? Thompson glared at his partner but didn't answer. Linda started dialing 911. Hello, I'd like to report 2 men impersonating law enforcement officers in my neighborhood. Within minutes, Jake could hear sirens in the distance. Linda had given the 911 dispatcher their exact location, and it sounded like the police were taking the call seriously. Both fake officers were now looking extremely nervous, shifting from foot to foot and glancing repeatedly at their white van. Maybe we should go, Dave Williams said to his partner. Nobody's going anywhere until the police get here, Linda said firmly. She had positioned herself between the 2 men and their vehicle, and despite being barely 5 feet tall, She somehow managed to look intimidating. Thompson, whose real name was still unknown, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling our supervisor to straighten this out." "Go ahead," Jake said, still recording. "I'd love to hear that conversation." Thompson pretended to dial a number and held the phone to his ear. After a few seconds, he started talking. "Yeah, Rodriguez? We've got a situation here at Pine Valley Heights. There's been some kind of misunderstanding." He paused, as if listening to someone on the other end. Jake noticed that the phone screen was dark, indicating that Thompson wasn't actually talking to anyone. "Uh-huh," Thompson continued his fake conversation. "Okay, I'll tell them." He hung up and looked at the group. "Our supervisor is on his way to clear this up." "What's his ETA?" Linda asked. 20 minutes. Perfect, Linda said. "That'll give us plenty of time to sort this out with the real police." The sirens were getting louder now, and Jake could see flashing lights reflecting off the houses at the end of the street. Bruno had been sitting calmly through most of this encounter, but the approaching sirens made his ears perk up with interest. A patrol car turned the corner and pulled up behind Linda's Honda. 2 officers got out, a middle-aged man with sergeant stripes and a younger female officer. They both looked professional and alert as they approached the group. "I'm Sergeant Rodriguez," the older officer said, and Jake couldn't help but notice the irony of the name. "We got a call about someone impersonating law enforcement?" "That would be these 2 gentlemen," Linda said, pointing at Thompson and Williams. "They've been trying to extort money from this young man by pretending to be HOA enforcement officers." Sergeant Rodriguez looked at the 2 men in their fake uniforms. "May I see some identification, please?" Thompson tried one more bluff. "We're certified enforcement officers. We don't have to show civilians our ID." "I'm not a civilian," Sergeant Rodriguez said dryly. "I'm a police officer, and I'm asking for your identification. Now." The female officer had moved to position herself on the other side of the 2 men, effectively boxing them in. Jake noticed that both real cops kept their hands near their weapons, though they hadn't drawn them. Dave Williams finally cracked under the pressure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet, handing over his driver's license. "My name is David Williams. I live over in Riverside. And you?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked Thompson. Thompson reluctantly handed over his license as well. "Mike Thompson." "Mr. Thompson and Mr. Williams," the sergeant said, examining their IDs. "What exactly are you doing here?" "We were just trying to make some extra money," Williams said miserably. "We bought these uniforms online and figured we could collect some fines from people walking their dogs." "You figured you could steal money from people," the female officer corrected. "It wasn't stealing. We were providing a service." "What service?" Linda asked incredulously. Williams fumbled for an answer. "Community enforcement services?" Sergeant Rodriguez handed the licenses to his partner and turned his attention to Jake. "Sir, can you tell me what happened here?" Jake gave a detailed account of the entire encounter, from the initial approach to the moment when Thompson tried to grab Bruno's leash. He showed the sergeant the video he had recorded, which clearly showed both men refusing to provide proper identification and making up fake rules and regulations. "They tried to fine me $225 for walking my dog," Jake explained. "When I questioned their authority, they got aggressive and tried to take my dog away for what they called official measurement and breed verification." "That's when you revealed your weapon?" the sergeant asked. "I didn't draw it or point it at anyone," Jake clarified. "I just made sure they could see that I was armed and prepared to defend myself and my dog if they tried to attack us." Sergeant Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Sounds like you handled it exactly right. You have a concealed carry permit?"
Jake pulled out his wallet and showed his permit.
"I work in security downtown. I've had this permit for 3 years." "Good man," the sergeant said. He turned back to Thompson and Williams. "And you 2 decided to try to steal this man's dog?" "We weren't trying to steal it," Thompson protested. "We were going to take it for official verification and return it." "Return it where? To who?" "You're not officials of any kind." The female officer had been examining their van while this conversation was taking place. She walked back over to the group carrying a cardboard box. "Sergeant, you need to see this." She opened the box to reveal dozens of fake citations, clipboards with made-up violation codes, a stack of cheap plastic badges, and what looked like several $100s in cash.
Looks like you two have been busy, Sergeant Rodriguez observed.
Williams started crying. We just needed the money, man. I lost my job last month and my rent is due. So you decided to become criminals? Linda asked unsympathetically. How many people have you scammed? The female officer asked. Thompson refused to answer, but Williams was now in full confession mode. Maybe 15 or 20 over the past 2 weeks. We've been hitting different neighborhoods around the city. How much money have you stolen? About $3,000 total. Jake felt sick to his stomach thinking about all the people who had probably just paid these guys rather than question their authority. How many elderly residents had been frightened into handing over money? How many dog owners had been intimidated by these fake officials? You're both under arrest, Sergeant Rodriguez announced. Mr. Thompson, you're being charged with impersonating a law enforcement officer, attempted theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted animal theft. Mr. Williams, you're facing the same charges. As the real officers began the process of arresting the two scammers, Linda turned to Jake. I'm so sorry this happened in our neighborhood. Thank goodness you were smart enough to question them and record the whole thing. Thank you for showing up when you did, Jake replied. I don't know how much longer that standoff would have lasted. Are you okay? That must have been terrifying. Jake looked down at Bruno, who was now lying calmly at his feet as if nothing unusual had happened. We're fine, but I keep thinking about all the other people who probably weren't so lucky. The female officer overheard this comment. Don't worry about that. We'll be following up with the victims to return their money and get their statements. These two are going to be facing serious prison time. As the patrol car drove away with Thompson and Williams in the back seat, Jake finally felt like he could relax. The whole encounter had lasted less than an hour, but it felt like the longest evening of his life. 3 weeks later, Jake was back to his normal routine of evening walks with Bruno. The incident with the fake HOA officers had become something of a legend in Pine Valley Heights, and Jake found himself stopped regularly by neighbors who wanted to hear the story firsthand. The police investigation had been thorough and swift. Thompson and Williams, whose real names turned out to be Michael Torres and David Williams, had been charged with multiple felonies. The evidence Jake had recorded on his phone became crucial in building the case against them. The video clearly showed them impersonating officials, making false claims about non-existent regulations, and attempting to steal money from residents. Linda Chen had become something of a local hero as well. Her quick thinking in confronting the scammers and calling the police had prevented them from potentially targeting other neighborhoods that evening. The HOA board had officially commended both her and Jake at their monthly meeting, and the story had even made the local newspaper. The investigation revealed that Torres and Williams had been operating their scam for over a month, targeting dog owners in upscale suburban neighborhoods across the city. They had stolen nearly $4,000 from victims, most of whom were elderly residents who had been too intimidated to question their authority. The fake uniforms, badges, and equipment had all been purchased online for less than $100. Jake learned that several other victims had paid the fake fines immediately, without asking any questions. One elderly woman had given them $300 after they claimed her small poodle was an unregistered, aggressive breed. A young father had paid $200 rather than risk having his children's beloved golden retriever impounded. Hearing these stories made Jake even more grateful that he had trusted his instincts and stood his ground. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Both men eventually pleaded guilty to avoid trial, and they were sentenced to 2 years in prison plus restitution to all their victims. The judge specifically noted Jake's video evidence in determining the sentences, saying that the recordings clearly showed the defendant's criminal intent and willingness to use intimidation tactics. Jake's concealed carry permit and his decision to reveal his weapon had generated some discussion in the neighborhood. A few residents questioned whether it was necessary or appropriate, while others praised him for being prepared to defend himself and his property. The police officers who responded to the scene had been clear in their support of Jake's actions, noting that he had handled the situation responsibly and within the law. Sergeant Rodriguez had stopped by Jake's house a few days after the incident to follow up on the case. He explained that Jake's decision to record the encounter and his calm handling of the situation had probably prevented the scammers from escalating to violence. You did everything right, the sergeant had told him. You questioned their authority. You recorded the interaction. You didn't escalate the situation unnecessarily, and when they tried to steal your dog, you were prepared to defend yourself. That's exactly how these situations should be handled. The incident had also sparked some positive changes in the neighborhood. Linda Chen had organized a community safety meeting where local police officers came to talk about how to identify and respond to various scams. The HOA had also implemented a new policy requiring all legitimate contractors and service providers to display official photo identification and contact information. Jake's security company had been so impressed with his handling of the situation that they had offered him a promotion to a supervisory position. His quick thinking and professional demeanor under pressure had demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment they wanted in their management team. Bruno seemed completely unaffected by the whole experience. The big German Shepherd continued to be his usual friendly, laid-back self on their daily walks. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the extra attention from neighbors who now recognized him as the dog whose owner had helped catch the neighborhood scammers. On this particular evening, as Jake and Bruno made their way around their familiar route, Jake reflected on how much his perspective had changed. He was more aware now of his surroundings and more willing to trust his instincts when something felt wrong. The experience had reinforced his belief in the importance of being prepared, both mentally and physically, for unexpected situations. Mrs. Patterson waved to them from her garden, where she was planting new flowers for the summer. "How are my two favorite heroes doing tonight?" she called out. Jake smiled and waved back. "Just taking our regular walk, Mrs. Patterson." "You keep that phone handy," she advised with a grin. "Never know when we might need you to catch more bad guys." As they continued their walk, Jake thought about how a simple evening routine had turned into such a significant event. It reminded him that you never really know when ordinary moments might become extraordinary, and that being prepared, whether with recording equipment, legal self-defense tools, or just good common sense, could make all the difference. The sun was setting as they reached the community park, painting the sky in the same beautiful orange and pink hues that Jake had been enjoying for years. Everything looked peaceful and normal, just the way it should be in a neighborhood where people looked out for each other. Bruno trotted happily beside him, tongue hanging out slightly, looking like the most content dog in the world. Jake reached down to pat his loyal companion's head, grateful for the bond they shared and the adventure they had survived together. As they headed home, Jake felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had protected his dog, helped his community, and proven to himself that when push came to shove, he could handle whatever life threw at him. Tomorrow would bring another evening walk, another chance to enjoy the simple pleasure of spending time with his best friend in their safe, friendly neighborhood. And if any more fake officials showed up trying to scam residents, well, Jake would be ready for them too.